Welcome back to Open Line. We are talking about term limits for our lawmakers tonight and what it will take to get them. I have a great guest with me tonight, Erin Dukette, who is the state director for Tennessee for U.S. term limits. Erin, again, thank you for being with us. We have another half hour to go. We would invite any phone calls. Let us know what you think about term limits. The number is on the screen, 615-737+. Erin, y'all have a great website. It's termlimits.com. I was checking it out before the show here, and I was looking at the different questions that people usually ask about this and the different arguments people make. And one thing that really jumped out to me was a pro of term limits is it really balances the power among the states. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And so what we say to that is this. I guess one great advantage of that Supreme Court ruling in '95 is that, okay, so term limits have to come by constitutional amendment, and that means this law is going to apply across the board regardless of the state. Well, if you have term limits in place, right now we have several states, right, that have very long termers. They've been there 30 plus years, that hold a lot of sway and have a stranglehold and a monopoly on power there. And so other states really can't compete with that. And so if you have term limits, you're going to level the playing field there, because even if there's a majority leader or a committee chairman in a different state that is doing all kinds of things that might be deleterious to the country, at the end of the day, they're going to be gone after so much time, just as any other legislator is. And so it guarantees that at some point they're going to be gone. And what that really means is that you're going to have an open seat election. And to me, it's almost the result of term limits being open seat elections is almost synonymous with what this issue is about. We want an amendment for open seat elections, because when you have an open seat election, what do you have? You don't have that incumbent that's been there forever with all that war chest, with all that money, being able to really kind of bullyrag a challenger around. Ballotpedia did a study and analysis. They now think that you need at least $2.5 million just to equal name recognition with an incumbent, right? I mean, who's got that hanging around, right? So what intelligent teacher or police officer has that kind of money? They don't. And so many good people don't run. Well, if you have term limits, it's going to apply across the board. Everybody's going to have to leave at some point, just like with the presidency. And so what that means is you have more competition, just like when the presidential elections every 4 years. If it's not an incumbent, or if a president has served 2 terms already, they are constitutionally mandated to leave after that second term. Okay, so that what happens is that you have 2 primary elections in both of the major parties, and you get third parties involved, and you get much more competition for that seat. And so I say, when there's more competition for a seat, both at the primary level and the general election level, that benefits voters. Voters benefit from a breadth of choices. Very often we feel like you get into the ballot box, you're like, I don't really have a choice, right? I am stuck holding my nose and voting for the lesser of 2 evils again and again and again. Or at a protest, I just don't vote, right? Right. And so what that guarantees is an open seat election.
Let's get to the lines real quick. We have Rob on the line. Good evening, Rob. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If you want a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, you need term limits on all public offices. Every one of them ought to have term limits on them, so that more people could be part of their government. Also, the government ought to be taught in the school system, where the children, when they come out of school, they have a sense of how government operates and how the different offices operate in government. But until we get our country back in the hands of the people and take it out of these leaders that crave power, once they stay in office for a few years, all they're doing is craving power and benefiting themselves. You can look at the benefits they give themselves that they should not be allowed to be done. That should be voted on by the people also. And that's my understanding of how government is getting more and more powerful, and people are losing less and less power of their government officials.
Yeah. Thank you, Rob. I think you bring up a point a lot of people have. We appreciate hearing from you tonight. You have a good night, Rob. Erin, I want to ask you about this. Our country is more divided than ever, and it has been now for a couple of years. We've been marching in this direction. Does that also mean that we are marching in a stronger direction in pushing the term limits? Are you seeing this gain speed?
Yeah, it's kind of the interesting thing about term limits I've mentioned before. You know, it's a uniquely nonpartisan issue, or I like to call it it's a nonpartisan solution to a bipartisan problem.
Yeah.
The problems in D.C. are both parties, right? And they work together more than we think. And they like to kind of pit us against each other, really. I mean, they make it about the people and about this team versus that team. But really, it's an issue. I'm sorry, repeat your question again.
Well, do you feel like that even as we get more divided, that this push is gaining more momentum?
Sure. Yeah, we have seen that, especially in the last year.
Yeah.
I think the COVID-19 pandemic and the presidential election and all the sort of just political circus that's happened in the last year or so has really kind of stoked the fires. And it's a unique thing where we can come in with term limits as a uniquely bipartisan solution and actually come together with people that we maybe ordinarily would not see eye to eye on in political issues for the greater good of the country, because we see that the problem in Congress is not necessarily Democrats or Republicans, but it is beyond that. It's really about the incumbency monopoly that we see in Congress, that they are holding on to their positions for far too long. And the longer that they're there, the less responsive. They live 1,000, 2,000 miles away from their constituencies. They rarely go home. They don't spend much time there. And so they're not hearing from their people. And so they become more and more disconnected the longer that they're there from the voices that they're there to speak for.
So what can people do who do want to see term limits that will make a difference? A lot of people, you say, write your legislator, and they think, well, that's just going to some email, some aides looking at it and tossing it in the trash.
Yeah, and then that's right. If you send kind of a form email, very often it's sort of just glazes over, right? Well, that's a good start, right? I think you can call your legislator. You can even show up. I know the Tennessee legislature is open. We have our active legislation there. It's House Joint Resolution 8. Representative Chris Todd filed it, and it actually passed through the House this year and is heading over to the Senate. And so polling your state legislator's ear is a good thing. Those state legislators, they live in your districts, and they're in a part-time legislature. They're not 1,000 miles away. They will be responsive to you. They hear you. And so you can make noise and let them know. I mean, you can go to a local meeting or something and actually talk to them directly to let them know. But also, at our website, we're always recruiting our grassroots volunteers at termlimits.com. And then you click on the volunteer link, and people can actually get involved and actually work with myself and others to get this done. So,
what do you think the chances are in the Tennessee Senate?
Extraordinarily strong.
Oh, wow.
We came in, we do U.S. term limits started a few years ago, started a pledge program with candidates and incumbent legislators in the states to ask them to sign a pledge to vote for and co-sponsor this resolution that would enable this to happen using the Article 5 process. And we came into it, we did a lot of work. There's a team at U.S. term limits, talked to a lot, before the elections last year to get pledges in. We ended up with close to 30 seated legislators that had signed our pledge right off the bat. So it gives us a real foothold. And actually what we do with our volunteers now is try to get those pledges. And so it gave us a real foothold. There's a lot of sentiment. We did pass on a bipartisan vote. And so it's moving.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Okay, we got another call on the line. Tom is on. I always try to get to you as quickly as you call in. Tom, good evening. Go ahead.
How you doing? I'm for term limits, but here's my thing.
Okay.
What do we need political parties for? think about that. I know people, it doesn't matter. They're going to vote straight down the line for their party, and they're ignorant. They don't even know what they're voting for. I don't like political parties. I'll stand by and listen for your reply.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. We appreciate hearing from you tonight. Maybe a little out of your wheelhouse, but Erin, have you heard that one before?
No, heck no. Yeah, that's totally in my wheelhouse.
Good.
To bring back Washington, right? His grand example. The party that he belonged to was none. Right?
Yeah.
He was a nonpartisan president. And there's something I grew up in New Hampshire, so I really sympathize with that sort of independent spirit. Just tell me who you are and what you're about, and I will reason about it and make my vote, right? And I think there's a real problem with that, right? That everything is so hyper partisan. So I can tell you this, with term limits, if you put term limits in place, it's not going to solve all of the ills in Congress or all the ills in the country. However, it's going to be a major piece. And here's why. If you have those open seat elections, that means there's more competition for those seats. And that means that the parties actually have to battle with themselves to produce who their candidate is going to be. There might be, one candidate who party leadership, really wants to push as the next one to get that seat. But there's room, for disagreement, and that's why we have primaries. And so having term limits opens that up. If there's really a correlation between longevity in Congress, if you're there for decades, and actually being entrenched more in partisan politics and partisan bickering, because you don't have that motivation to be accountable to the voters and actually have to reach across the aisle. It's the younger members of Congress, and I don't mean in terms of age necessarily, but I mean in terms of being newer to Congress, that actually reach across the aisle and come up with innovative solutions. It's not the ones that have been there 30, 40 years. It's just not.
That's interesting. I did notice, I read on your website that as of, I guess, early in 2020, 15 states have term limits on their state lawmakers. Is there anything to be garnered from that? And Kentucky and Tennessee are not among them.
They're not, and so that is the fruit of the efforts back in the 90s that we talked about, that primarily through ballot initiatives, but actually some of the state legislatures passed term limits on themselves, believe it or not. And so that's a carryover largely from the 90s there. A more recent one is Louisiana. Louisiana's state legislature just had their term limits kick in last election cycle in 2019. And so that's a holdover from that. And some of those states have seen good things come out of that. There's not necessarily a direct correlation that can be drawn, but there's something to be noted by the fact that 4 of the top 5 most fiscally solvent state legislatures are term limited. Leading with Florida, and so there's some benefit there. Now, U.S. term limits doesn't actively go and try to push for new term limits on the state legislatures right now, because we're focused on the big fish, and that is thoroughly Congress with that 96% reelection rate and 11% approval rating.
Most certainly.
And we need those state legislatures to get it done.
Yeah. Let's get back to the phone lines. Ernie is on the line. Hi, Ernie. Go ahead.
Hi. Well, I was going to give an answer to why do we have parties.
Yes, sir.
It's a conduit for money is all that is. For instance, in small towns or even big towns, the people run. They don't run on the party line because it doesn't take that much money. You go to the county level, maybe a little more, but still, it's only when you start getting into the higher offices do they have to run as a member of some party to get funding.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
It would seem so, Ernie. I think you got the nail on the head. Thank you for calling in.
Yeah. Well, where am I wrong?
I don't have anything to argue with you. Erin, do you?
You're 100% correct, sir. I wanted to mention earlier, and this is a good time to mention that you're right. I mean, the parties really function as funding, and maybe it's arguable that the parties serve a function in order to organizing people around certain general principles that they agree upon, and so Yeah, you're absolutely correct about the influence of money there, and it's so pronounced. And remember that the super PACs give over 9 out of every $10 to those incumbents over the challengers. Now that's not a party giving; that's a how long you've been in Congress sort of giving principle. In 2016, another Ballotpedia study, they analyzed the 2016 elections in the House of Representatives, and they found by their metrics that only 23 out of the 435 elections were competitive.
Wow.
In other words, there are a ton of elections that were really, you had someone that didn't have their name recognition, that just didn't know who it was. And so you start off saying, well, who's that? And a lot of people just end up taking for the person that they know.
All right, we got to go to another commercial break. We're back after this.